Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to today's quantitative history webinar. And I'm Sijie, and it's really a great pleasure for me to be today's moderator. And today we're very happy and also pleased, honored to have Professor Vincent Goossaert with us. Professor Goossaert is Director of Studies in Daoism and Chinese Religions at L'École Pratique des Hautes Études. In today's talk, Professor Goossaert will share his new research on the religious book market in the Qing dynasty, introduce the CRTA open access database to us, and also show how this database can shed new light on late imperial religious print culture. So we are very much looking forward to the talk. And today we are also very honored to have Professor Jiechen Hu as our discussant. Professor Hu is an associate professor at the Department of Religious Studies at Fudan University. And his main areas of research are Daoism and popular religions in late imperial China. And Professor Hu's expertise will no doubt bring new insights and valuable insights to the discussion today. So in terms of the structure, Professor Goossaert will deliver a 1-hour presentation followed by a 15-minute discussion by Professor Hu. And we will then open the floor for a 10-minute Q&A session. So for our audience online, please feel free to submit your questions to the Q&A box through Zoom, and we will relay as many as possible to Professor Goossaert during the Q&A session. Okay, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Goossaert, and Vincent, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Hu, Professor Chen, the Center for Quantitative History, for inviting me to join this webinar. This is a wonderful occasion to share a work in progress with a collective work. I'm going to explain why collective in a moment, on the late imperial and modern Chinese book culture. And also warmest thanks to Chen for accepting to serve as a discussant for this session. So I'm going to share my screen now. And yes, and show you my slideshow. Yes, I think you should have it on screen now. Full screen. Okay. Very briefly, why quantitative history and Chinese religious history? This is not so commonly done in the field. So many of my colleagues who have a more philological training do not so easily spontaneously engage in quantitative history, but the material is there. I mean, the resources, the historical resources are there to look at longer term and larger scale development of religious traditions in China. We can there are several type of data we can measure, such as temples. We know there were about at least 1 million temple in late 19th century China, and we have sources for their location and date of buildings and religious affiliation and so on and so forth. We can count clerics. It's something I've actually done thanks to archival material on the census of Buddhist and Taoist clerics in the mid-Qing, early Qing period. We can also count stele inscriptions, for which we have massive amounts of data, each with location and dates and connection to specific religious traditions and practices. And then there are books, and that's the topic of the presentation today. So in order to look at book production and book culture in China, especially in late imperial and modern times, we of course need data. And so I'm going to spend a moment introducing and presenting the data set I'm using for this presentation, and that's the open access Wikimedia technology-based resource CRTA, Chinese Religious Text Authority, which we have been developing with a group of colleagues and friends, including, I'm not going to list all the participants here, but a core group with whom we created and developed this database include Professor Catherine Alexander, University of Colorado, Professor Gregory Scott, University of Manchester, Professor Marcus Bingenheimer, Temple University in Philadelphia, Professor Philippe Claert in Leipzig, Professor Cao Xinyu at Renmin Daxue, and others. And also now Dr. Lan Yangyang was working with me in Paris, developing the data. So the idea is that the data is completely open access, but we need a user account in order to create data. But we open accounts for our regular contributors. So far, the database is about presenting detailed, reliable descriptions of religious editions. We don't provide images or text files so far, but right now we are starting on a project to OCR and made publicly available searchable text versions of at least some of the many editions described in CRTA. But at the moment, it's really descriptions of editions that are available elsewhere, either online or in our libraries, but for which there are no tools, no research tools so far. So the basic principle is that each page in the database, and as of today, we have about 6,000 such pages. Each page describes one edition. So it's not about the text as textual contents, but it's about how these texts are circulated as specific editions, right? So for very popular text, and we are going to talk about the most popular religious text in early modern China, in a moment. For those texts, we look at each edition because by principle, each edition is different, even though the difference might be minor, like a preface or a postface there. Each edition carries specific information about how these texts circulated. So very quickly, this project started just before COVID, and it always went hand in hand with training workshops, either in presence or online, training of young scholars to read religious texts of various genres and affiliations. So the idea is to contribute to the development of a global community of scholars interested in Chinese religious texts, and building together a tool to explore these texts at the same time as we train people to read them. Right, so we have had workshops on specific genres, like the precious volumes, Bao Juan, the spirit writing books, and others, right? So both online and in presence, usually in France, because that's where I'm based. And so we have currently a French-German funded project on the history of circulation of Chinese religious texts, together with Professor Claert in Leipzig, Germany. So we have a steering committee for the database, and as I said, a worldwide community of young scholars who have taken part in our various workshops. So very quickly, how we define the object of our inquiry, religious text. We are not very interested in having hard definitions, excluding things, right? So we have no boundary for what we want to describe in the database and what we don't. The definition of what is religious, what is not, is always moot, and it's a question of perspective. So rather than having those hard boundaries, we rather want to focus on collections and corpora that we think should be described in priority. So we work by phases, right? And the first phase, what we really started with in the database, and still today is the largest component of the database, is the many reprint collections that have been published in China or in various spaces, including Taiwan. of editions stored either in public libraries or private collections, and those collections are widely available in our libraries. Some of them have been digitized, are available online. So they are readily available, but very few scholars use them because they are vast amounts. We're talking about hundreds of volumes of documents, and nobody has a map of those collections. So our project really started as a mapping project of those newly available documents. And then we also started documenting the digitized text in library collections that many libraries around the world, China itself, but also in Japan, Europe, US, and other places, Australia, library have been digitizing and made available online PDFs of their rare books, including lots of very interesting religious books. So they are available, but likewise, they provide metadata, but these are not really integrated in research tools. So that's what we are doing. And this is also a home for individual projects on specific collections, including private collections. I mean, lots of scholars in our field collect books that they find in the course of doing fieldwork or buy online or through other means, and they create very valuable research collections around specific local traditions or religious schools or others. And we are very happy to host those collections and describe them. Okay. So far, because of this way of working with collections that we want to describe in priority, some religious traditions are less represented. So far, it's not that we exclude them at all. We want to include them, but that will come in due course, including Muslim and Christian books and editions, for which, of course, there are also already very nice online resources, such as the website developed by Professor Nicolas Standard in Leuven for Chinese Christian texts. Okay, so everyone can, and I took a few screenshots of the database as per yesterday, and you're of course very welcome to visit it. I provided the URL on the first page, so it's crta.info. As per yesterday or today, we document 32 reprint collections, which represent altogether a bit over 3,000 different editions, and each with their own page. The work of describing all of the text in all of those collections is not yet complete. Still some work to do, but we're getting there. We also have so far 17 library collections. So this is less systematically done so far, but we're working on it. And also 30, and sorry, not 32, actually 3, sorry, that's a typo. Research collections, in particular, the digital catalog of Chinese Buddhism developed by Professor Gregory Scott, which is also a major collections with over 2,000 pages. Okay, so briefly, the goals of the database. So this database was not created specifically for the purpose of engaging with quantitative history. That's one of the many things we can do with CRTA, so that's what I'm doing today. But it has other goals. So I was saying mapping this textual production, enabling scholars, researchers to find specific editions, specific authors, specific religious groups, specific cults, even gods, religious traditions, to look at religious text production in specific locales, places. It also allows us to overcome the strict boundaries of religious affiliation, right? So we don't divide between Buddhist books, Daoist books, Confucian books, and so on and so forth. But we try to because authors, readers, presses did not strictly make such distinctions, right? Even as we will see, an avowedly, explicitly Buddhist press could publish lots of Taoist or sectarian material, right? So it's very useful to take a larger view and comprehensive view of the kind of text that were produced and circulated to put together all of those different religious traditions. we aim to provide detailed table of contents and paratext, because that's something that library catalogs don't do, and that allow us to find specific text. Many readers' books are actually compilations of lots of different short texts that never exist as books because they are very short, but have their own lives and circulate between different anthologies and editions. And to wrap up with this introduction to the database, to the data set, we aim to make this literature more easily accessible to scholars who don't work on religious history, but who would find very useful material for their own research project in that kind of religious text in the largest sense, right? Like, for instance, in morality books, you would find a lot of things about economic history, about gender relationships, about family values, and so on and so forth. So things that would be of interest to economic or social or cultural historians. And in order for those historians, or indeed for 20th century sociologists and anthropologists, to be able to use this material, we help through CRTA, help them find relevant text and passages, and to get element of context for those texts. Okay, so now to the core of my presentation: quantitative analysis of this corpus. So as I was saying, as per today, about 6,000 pages, but that's really work in progress, both within the collections that are already in CRTA and other collections that await for us to describe them and include them. Have no precise idea of the total available corpus and texts that are out there in the libraries or online that wait for us to find them, but certainly over 20,000, right? So this is not the numbers and charts I'm going to show you are not definitive. That's the preliminary result of analysis of what is already in CRTA, but we add to the data set on a daily basis, right? So maybe if I come back to you in a year or two, I will have to revise my conclusions because the new data will have showed that there were biases in what have been described so far. Anyway. So a few very simple general observation about this data set of about 6,000 different editions. We have some manuscripts. So this is really, we are focused on print culture. And of course, for the Qing, that's by and large essentially woodblock print culture. As you can see, well, and not all entries have been fully described in terms of format, right? But so the majority of our editions are woodblock prints. But the number of manuscripts is not negligible, and that reminds us of an important fact that even though late imperial and most of our texts are late imperial editions, right? From the late Ming to the early, to the Republican period included. This was by and large a print culture, but manuscript culture did not disappear. And in certain genres of text, manuscript culture remained very important. Certain texts circulated only in manuscript form, not in print, for various reasons, including the fact that certain texts were not meant to be available to everyone, right? Like in some traditions, like ritual instructions for ritual specialists, where certain types of ritual instructions were not printed because they were copied from master to disciple, right? And so even though reprint collection tend to focus on printed books rather than manuscript, they still include those, and this is something we have to keep in mind. And of course, for from the late 19th century onward, we have a rising number of lithographs and then books printed with the mechanical press and movable type from the early 20th century onward. We can also, and I'm not going to do much of this at all today, but may analyze by types of publisher. That's something that is on the agenda. Look at what kind of books were published by private families, by commercial presses, by religious institutions, and then from the early Republican period onward by the major like Shanghai-based publishers. Some of them simply commercial presses, some of them linked to religious institutions. We can make a geographical analysis, look at the different religious print cultures in different regions, and I'm going to do a bit of that. Look at the temporal evolution, and look at different textual genres. Okay, so let's start with geographical analysis, because CRTA has a search function that search in the core information that is on the top of each page, including dates, place, authors, titles, and a few other basic information. We can very easily find all the books that we have in a database printed in a given place. So I just show you an example here, taking Beijing. And I actually used that for a conference paper some time ago that was looking at religious history of Beijing, and so with that we can immediately create a corpus of all the religious texts printed in Beijing, right? And that's a screenshot of the hit list from this search. Of course, just a few, the first few lines. So when we go a little bit deeper and try to compare a major cities and their traditions of printing religious text, we very quickly find that, of course, as in the corpus as a whole, Shanghai takes the lion's share. That doesn't come as a surprise, but you can see here how massive the number of Shanghai printed editions are. But this is very much a Republican period phenomenon, right? Almost 1,500 editions, but only 17 before before 1911, right? So if we look at the print culture in the Qing, then as I'll show you in a moment, the Jiangnan region, of course, of which Shanghai became the metropolis, still is dominant. But we have other major cities, Beijing, Guangzhou, Chengdu, were also served as also had their vibrant religious print culture, with specific local religious presses, the so-called Shansuju, which published large numbers of editions, right? And so if we only look at the numbers before, excluding the Republican period, then of course we get a very different picture. I've tried to, for all the editions for which we have a precise publication place, of which, as you can see here on this table, we have 3,300 something. Not all of our editions are precisely located. That's a problem with especially reprint collections that sometimes do not include the cover page of the editions. And that's usually on the cover page that you find the place and date of a given print. So that's, of course, very frustrating. But for those for which we have a certain definite printing place, then we have this distribution, and as you can see, Jiangnan is really dominant. Over 2/3 of the corpus, of the whole corpus, comes from the Jiangnan region, with beside Shanghai, other major printing centers such as Nanjing, Suzhou, and Hangzhou, and even others like Yangzhou, Changzhou, and Ningbo. Other places also had very sizable numbers of printed editions. The other regions, as you can see, northern China, with Beijing as a major center, and then some other centers in Shandong and later on Dongbei. Central China, Sichuan, very important, and that's something that the recent Sichuan religious project led by Professor Elena Valusi and Stefania Hawagnin showed, also had a vibrant, specific local religious print culture. And then maybe a little bit surprisingly, relatively low numbers for the Cantonese world and the Minnan world. I mean, Fujian and Taiwan. Of course, we have a number of editions Taiwan from the Japanese period. But this, at least in the corpus, is significantly lower than the numbers from Zhongnan. Okay. So that's for geographical distribution. Now, time period, the timelines. Again, here we work only with exact publication date when we have the date of the woodblock carving clearly indicated in the book. We don't do, we clearly distinguish at least from estimated publication dates that we can find, like the last date mentioned in the book, or the date of the last preface, that Yuan, that kind of thing. So we can also use for other analyses. But here I'm only dealing with those editions that have a precise, exact publication date, which is only a part of the corpus. And if we look at the Qing specifically, we have almost 1,100 precisely dated editions, and you can see that on this, and I'm going to show more charts in a moment, but that over half of it comes from the last 15 years of the dynasty. Of course, it makes sense that we have the later in time, the more text we have, but this is really massive. And for this, this sort of analysis of the temporal evolution of text production, I really want to emphasize that I don't mean this to be understood as a completely reliable picture of the actual number of books that were printed in these different time periods. That's what we have. That's the corpus we have in the readily available reprint collections or library collections, right? So there is clearly a bias in the books that are available to us. But this in itself is significant, right? Because this basically reflects what we as historians of Chinese culture or Chinese religion in particular are working with. And I think it's not necessarily a major problem, but we need to be aware that what we are reading, what we are working with, it was produced in the very late phase of, was mostly produced in the last decade or so of the Qing dynasty, and therefore reflects the interest and perspectives of the intellectuals who were living, and religious activists who were living in that particular period, right? And it also reflects the massive destructions caused by the Taiping War. Because the Taiping War not only killed several tens of millions of people and destroyed hundreds of thousands of temples and religious institutions, it also destroyed and burned the books that were housed in those institutions. And it's very frequent in those late Qing reeditions to read that the people were looking for one copy of a book that whose woodblocks were burned or destroyed during the war, and try to find a copy in order to recarve blocks and redistribute, recirculate those books, right? And that's one major reason why we have so many editions from after the Taiping War. So that's a timeline. So here I include a little bit more. I include the first, basically the first decade of the Republican period up to 1920, and you see how the number of available editions start to take off just after, in the wake of the Taiping War, after 1864. And you can see that actually we have a significant number of books that were published during the war, right? So there was a major activity of religious text editing and publishing during the war, and as part of the war, as a reaction to the war situation. But then after the war, things accelerate very, very significantly in order to restore the circulation of the books. Now, if we want to look at this period more closely in this timeline here, we have a more focused analysis looking at 2-year intervals, and we can see how indeed production actually takes off not immediately after the war in 64, but more like around 68, 69. When institutions of, especially in the Jiangnan region, which, as we have seen, is so crucial to religious book printing, religious institutions and communities slowly recover and finds the financial means to restart printing activities, right? So things take off after 68, 69, then remain as a high level. And the top years, I mean, the golden years are really the last years of the 19th century, like between 96, 99. And then for some reason, the numbers go down, still remain significant, but the numbers of editions are somewhat lower in the last decade of the Qing, from 1900 to 1910, and then again a boom in the after 1915. Okay. Right. So that's, of course, we could say much more about the timeline of religious printing activities, and we could compare between different regions and different genres. But now I'm going to introduce another angle for analyzing the corpus, which is the genres themselves, the types of books that were printed, because the religious institutions and commercial presses and other type of institutions that printed books tend also to print different things, different types of contents in different places and in different periods of time. So in order to bring into the analysis the type of contents, type of text, we have devised a general typology, right? So this is really not meant to be a definitive descriptions of Chinese religious texts in general, but this is a tool to look at how different types of religious contents were printed by different groups and different times. So this is a typology in 12 types. I'm not going to read through all of this, but very simply, this is based on format rather than substantial content, right? So a revealed scripture is a book that is the word of the gods or the Buddha, so deserves calls for a particular format because it's ritually performed and need particular reverence and care. So liturgy is about how to perform rituals. Morality books, a very major role explaining the moral retribution. The good is rewarded, the evil is punished. Precious volumes is a particular type of performance texts, narrative stories, gazetteers of temples and sacred sites. Social documents, spiritual techniques are instruction on how to cultivate oneself. given by human masters or by gods, essays, poetry, philosophical tracts by major historical figures, prophecies, canons, were large collections of various texts, and divination calendars, right? So this is a bit blunt, of course. Each of those category take together rather different sorts of editions, but this is, I think, a simple enough tool to think about how different kinds of religious books are printed by different institutions and groups. So these are the numbers. Again, we have been assigning, that's my personal project, together with Dr. Lan Yang, who is working with me on this project. So as per today, you can see the distribution of those 12 types across almost 3,500 pages or editions that we have tagged with those categories. So because of the reprint collections we've been working with, which have many Baojuan, precious volumes, they have a large account for almost 1/4 of the whole corpus. So maybe this will change as we keep expanding the database. But still, it reminds us that Baojuan was and still is a major genre to express religious ideas and convictions in early modern and modern China. So that's something to keep in mind. Even one, Baojuan studies is a specific field, right? But even if one does not work with Baojuan, one should remain aware that this is a very popular means to convey and circulate and distribute religious ideas. Scriptures, extremely important. Of course, in all kind of editions, both the scriptures, simple scriptures made for ritual performance, Talmudi, but also commented, illustrated editions of some of those scriptures. Category 8, self-cultivation, also accounts of the personal side of religion, right? So how to practice on an individual basis, major genre. Morality books, 10%, but then there are, of course, moral teaching in some of the other genres, right? But as a specific type of text, morality books also account for a very substantial part of religious text production and dissemination. And it's also something we keep in mind if we want to understand the, let's say, the religious mindset of late imperial and modern Chinese. That's something, the kind of text that we need to take into account. Okay. And also one more observation based on this table is that so category 2, I call liturgy, these instructions for performing rituals, only specifically only account for 6%, still like over 200 different editions, right? But if we consider that the Baojuan, the precious volumes, as well as a large part of the scriptures, the Qing, are meant for ritual performance. They come together, especially the scriptures, with instruction on how to perform, right? How to set up an altar for chanting or performing the psalmody of this particular scripture, how to at the same time, purify yourself and practice visualizations and other, in writing talismans and communicating with the gods and so on and so forth, right? So this is really, there is a ritual framework for those texts. Some of the morality books were also performed ritually and includes instructions about ritual performance. The canons, the collections, have a lot of ritual content in them. So if you put all of this together, then, that's a very rough estimate, but I consider that about 1/2 of the corpus of the 6,000 books here were editions were edited for ritual performance, or at least could be used for ritual performance, right? So this ritual dimension of the book culture is something we also need to keep in mind all the time. Even though we might choose to read these books for their ideas, for intellectual history or thought history or cultural history, we have to keep in mind that in many, many cases, these books were meant for ritual performance. So the central place of rituals, and when I say ritual, I mean very broadly, right? From a collective, offerings and sacrificing to the gods to individual self-cultivation, right? The many different sorts of rituals are involved here, but ritual is at the center of this activity of, book editing, book printing, and circulating. And just one particular type of ritual that is very present in our text, and that was and is very commonly performed, is the litanies, right? The Chen. So a litany is a text where you express your regret for all the sins and transgression that you have performed, or that you have committed, and then you bow to a list, and sometimes very long list, of gods and Buddhas to ask for their forgiveness for those sins, right? And I have so far identified at least 112 editions that are solely or that include a litany in it. So how do we do that? Like I was just saying, 112 texts with litanies. That's because of the Wikimedia technology is a wonderful technology. And one of the great things you can do with Wikimedia is very easily tag a given page with what is Wikimedia called a category. That is, you just tag it with this category, and then automatically the database, the website will create a page with all of the pages, all the editions that have this tag, right? So we very freely create tags for specific things that we want to look at. So that includes things like elements in the text, like text that have illustrations, right? If you're interested in images in text, then you have those categories, and you immediately have a list of all of the texts that have either an iconic portrait of a god, or that have talismans or other sort of illustration. We also tag them with specific gods. If you're interested, for instance, in the god Wenchong, then we have a tag Wenchong that has all the texts that deal with Wenchong, that talk about him or have revelations by him, so on and so forth. Specific religious traditions, like if you're here on this page, you have, for instance, Jingming Daoism. That's a school of a particular school of Daoism. We have just tagged 4 pages with it, but we'll keep finding them and adding this tag to the text that deal with or talk about this particular Daoist traditions, right? And then also specific genres, like you have here Gongguoge, the Ledgers of Merit and Demerit, is very specific sort of text that gives you the number of good or bad points for the various good or evil actions that one may commit. And these type of texts are most often not in the title, right? Because there is such a Gongguoge, such a ledger within a book that might be a scripture or might be a morality book or something else, right? So you would not find them by just looking at the titles, right? But if, when describing a text and seeing that in it there is a ledger somewhere, then we tag it, and you immediately have, through this, your own corpus of all the texts that include such a textual element. So one of the things we can do with that is asking questions such as, what are the most popular books in late imperial and modern China? So I will not give you a definite answer to that question today, but and things will continue to emerge as we describe more editions and include more collections in the data set. But I'll just give you a few numbers to give an idea of what we can do with that sort of question with CRTA. So we have been counting the number of commented editions. Not usually it's only this particular text, with commentaries and illustrations and other textual elements, but they can also be included in something else, like in a canon or in a large anthology. So we have a very substantial numbers of editions of the Taishang Ganingpian. Taishang Ganingpian is a text that appeared around Northern Song, 1120 or so. But that became extremely popular in late medieval time. It still is very popular today. It's still widely reprinted in paper and online. But in late Imperial Republican times, we have over 120 different editions, right? So we knew that the Ganingpian was possibly the most popular, or at least absolutely central books in late Imperial modern Chinese religious culture, but now we can start to actually get a more objective, measured assessment of this importance. Right? We also, of course, know that Daoism also a major text. We have almost as many commentaries of the Daoism as of the Ganingpian. Here, another text, so fewer editions, but still very substantial, at least 50 different editions, and we are still counting them. So I think this is an underestimate. The Mingsheng, which is a scripture revealed by the god Guandi, right, the historical general Guan Yu of the Three Kingdoms, but it's in later modern times usually referred to respectfully as, Emperor Sovereign Guandi. So this text revealed probably around 1800. So it's a rather late text, but it immediately became very popular and reprinted, commented in all sort of formats. In the 19th and 20th century, right? So when we look at these numbers, one can start to rethink, what if I want to understand Chinese religious culture, what should I read? Maybe some of those texts should be there. We are still counting the numbers for the editions of the major Buddhist texts like Diamond Sutra and Hautes Sutra. So I don't yet have numbers to give you here, but they will certainly also be in those range. Okay. Very, very quickly, I don't have really time to explain this in any detail today, but to explore this question of the most popular texts, I'll also be counting texts and especially scriptures, including in ontologies of scripture, which are themselves within the CRTA corpus, but looking within the ontology, and so this and looking at three different ontologies, collections of scriptures. Two from the 19th century and one from the late Ming, the one below, the Zhuping Jingchen Gaotou, and see what they have in common, right? Each ontology's collections of texts and scriptures is different, but what they have in common somehow represent the consensus of various religious groups about the most important scriptures. And here we get a list of 6 scriptures that we're including in those three collections, and also point to texts we should really look more closely at in terms of their printing history and circulation. Okay. So 2 case studies to finish this presentation. The first one, I will be extremely brief because this is a project that Dr. Lan Yongyong and myself did, and we have a forthcoming article on it in the journal East Asian Publishing and Society. So in the coming month, so you'll be able to look at more closely at this. But we've looked at, I was explaining earlier, how the Taishang Ganingpian is one of the most popular books in our corpus, and then we look at those 124 editions, and so we also did a timeline of their printing, look at regional distribution, look at the most popular versions and commentaries, right? So we can use this tool. I mean, the data set of CRTA and that kind of quantitative analysis tools to look at particular text. That's what we did with the Ganingpian. Okay. But the second case study I want to speak a little bit more about is spirit writing. And that's something I've been working on for quite a few years. Spirit writing, so it's a group of ritual techniques that allow gods, spirits to take control of a writing implement and to write things, often and to give instruction in writing to a human community. And spirit writing was and is still today a major means fueling the textual production, right? and a major part of religious spring culture, as of course when the gods reveal the text to a human group through spirit writing, this group has, of course, the duty, the responsibility to print and disseminate these texts, right? So a very substantial part of all the texts that we're exploring here were produced through spirit writing. So in order to look more specifically at this phenomenon, and of course, Professor Chen will discuss this presentation in a moment. He's also a major, one of the top specialists of the history of spirit writing. So we are a worldwide community of historians interested in spirit writing, but we have so far mostly been doing case studies of specific texts or groups. And I think thanks to CRTA, we may now begin to try to reach a larger view, a more comprehensive view of in terms of number of groups, number of texts, and their distribution over the space and time and different genres, thanks to this CRTA data set. So based on the CRTA data, I've created two specific data sets. One is the spirit written book. So we tag each edition with spirit writing when the contents was produced by spirit writing, maybe not all of it, but at least some of it, and or if the book was published by a known spirit writing group community. Right. So I have so far about 310. Actually, the tag has a little bit more, but some of these editions are basically the same or reprint of the same. So I just count them as one in my own data set, and also identify specific spirit writing groups, often called, that's not the only term, but often called Jiechen. Tan also refers to both the human group and the physical place where they perform spirit writing, and try to find information in those texts about the location and the time where the group was active and what text they produced. And so far, I have about 160 of those groups. It's really work in progress, and again, this data is increasing by the day. But I think it's already large enough to allow us for some very preliminary observation about their spread. Okay, so the spirit writing halls first. So I was saying is really a fraction of all spirit writing halls or groups that ever existed. So if we compare, for instance, with Professor Liang Shizi work on the charities, the Shantong in the Qing, where she counted basically mostly based on mention of them in local gazetteers, almost 3,600 documented charities in the Qing. So my 160 is a rather small number. Why do I mention charities? It's because very often, not all the time, of course, but very often when we have a group that is well documented, we can see that, and especially in the late Qing and Republican period, the same group, the same institution as an identity toward the public as a charity, but was also functioning for their core members as spirit writing groups, right? The two were the same. It's just 28 with Y, right? So if even half of those charities also worked as spirit writing groups, then we should have many, many more than my 160. But so far, I'm really based on those for which I found good documentation in the text that they produce and printed themselves. Okay. Just a screenshot of my Excel file with the data set so far. So I told each one, so the name, the main god, and we can see that, Lüzu or Guandi or Wenchong or Jigong, Yaoche Jinmu, the different gods add their own networks of spirit writing groups, and that had also referred to that were linked to different regional traditions, right? So location, the text, and the dates, right? So I tried to map that. I'm sorry that I really did this map quick and dirty. When the data set is larger and more stabilized, I will use GIS tools to draw much nicer maps. But this is very, just to give you a quick idea. So I looked at those spirit writing groups for which I have a clear, reliable information on their location. And that's not all of them. Some of them I have a name, I have a text, but I don't have a clear indication of where they were located, right? So I look at the whole set, but whole 160, but try to look at, well, I put a cutoff date at 1875, which is somewhat arbitrary. But that's around the time where, after the Taiping War, restoration of religious activities, and we see a rapid expansion of religious book printing. So if we look at spirit writing active before that, then I have 41 mapped here, and you can see 1/3 in Jiangnan. Jiangsu, Shanghai, Zhejiang, and then a sizable cluster in Sichuan, Yunnan, and another cluster in Hunan, Hubei, and then not much else beyond that, right? So really 3 main centers here. Spirit writing was known elsewhere. I don't mean to say that there was no spirit writing in the other provinces. There was, that's for sure. That's a pan-Chinese phenomenon. But those spirit writing groups that were large enough to have printed books that are survived today into our collections were mostly in those 3 regional clusters. And if we look at the whole corpus, so going all the way basically to the 1940s, that's where we stopped documenting editions. We see that, of course, there were many more. One of the 21 well-located one, and we see an expansion. So still very thriving, vibrant spirit writing activity and spirit writing groups printing books in Jiangnan, but the proportion goes down to 26 as other regional clusters expand, and so we still have lots of Sichuan, Yunnan. Hunan, Hubei does not expand so rapidly, but then the north, we really see larger activity of spirit writing book printing in Beijing, Tianjin, Shandong, mostly, a little bit Dongbei, but really mostly the Beijing region and Shandong. So that's one cluster that really takes off after the 1880s, and also in the South Cantonese world, and of course Taiwan. Okay. And if we look at a timeline, and we have something similar, we have a spike here. That's because of a 1906 collection, a major canon, a Daoist canon called Chongkan Dao Zheng Tiao, which has a lot of spirit writing books inside. But this is a little bit of an artifact because actually it's one printing project with different books, including in the canon. That's one printing project. But we see how this is rather similar to the timeline we saw earlier for the whole corpus. Genres. So I use my general typology with a couple more subcategories here. So we see that different genres become more or less popular in the after 1875, right? So there is also an evolution in the type of books that the spirit writing groups printed. And I just mentioned one thing here, which is really not so obvious in the table, but it's the second line, instructions. And by instructions, I mean when an altar received lots of short instructions, prose or poetry, by lots of different gods, sometimes over 100 gods, right? So invite a lot of gods who tell them, give them instructions on different topics, morality, self-cultivation, and so on and so forth. These kinds of collections of divine instructions become actually the earliest ones I have are from the 1860s. So this is really becomes a very substantial part of the corpus around in the last 2 or 3 decades of the Qing, but it's not there before. Okay, so this also helps us. Maybe to show this more clearly, I should take a different cutoff date, maybe 1864. But we can use this to see how the same groups, the same type of groups, printed different things at different periods of times. Okay, I'm reaching my conclusion. That's the last slide. To very briefly mention the work ahead, right? What we, I think this, as I hope I showed you, with the corpus as it is, the data set as it is, and the kind of simple primary quantitative analysis I've showed you, you also get some insight about the larger picture, but there's much more that can be done, that should be done. But my first observation is that this allows us to put things in perspective and see that, yes, Shanghai, especially Shanghai during the Republican period and its major Buddhist presses like the Foshui Shuju, that kind of very powerful, wealthy institution that put out massive amounts of religious books in distribution. That has been rather well studied already. This is very important. So I'm not saying we should not look at that. We must look at that. It's central. But thanks to that kind of data and analysis, we can also look at what is beyond that. So other even if you remain in Jiangnan, look at the kind of religious presses that put out things not in Shanghai, but in Suzhou, Nanjing, Hangzhou, Ningbo, Yangzhou, etc. Right? And also look at other regional clusters and their own regional religious print cultures, such as Beijing or Sichuan, Yunnan, or Guangzhou, and Hong Kong, of course, and so on and so forth. So something I did not mention much today, but it's the type of presses. This is a bit tricky. This is more difficult to do, but this needs to be done because when we often, not always, but we often have the name of a publisher for a given edition, but very little information about what it is. And very often, if the publisher is called Shama Tang, right, the whole of this or that, it could be different things. It could be actually a private family. It could be what we call the Shanshuju, the morality book presses. It becomes very important in the 19th century that published not only morality books, but all kind of books like Bao Juan and scriptures and all kind of things. It could be a commercial press. You're printing, almanacs and novels, for profit. It could be all kind of things, right? So we need much more work to identify those different types of presses and institutions that publish books, but that's really next on our horizon. So cross-analyzing, I've given you very simple maps and timelines, but because of all the categories we use to we tag on each edition, we can do more fine-tuned cross-analysis of what different type of presses published in terms of in different places at different time periods and different genres, right? So who published what? Basically, that's the simple question behind that kind of analysis that we are just starting to do. And one last thing is, and that's a personal interest of mine, but it's also shared with a number of colleagues, to look at the gods, because as I said, many of the contents of those editions are revealed through thread writing by specific gods, and also many books tell the stories of the gods, even the Baojuan or the other narratives or the rituals. They all deal with specific gods, and so that's my next big project, is to identify each of the gods mentioned in those texts, and we have already started building an authority list of the gods, and through it we will be able to see how those the networks created over time by the printing and circulation of those books create networks of humans, but also networks of gods, and that's something CRTA can help us map and explore and understand as well. So I'll end up with that. I'll stop share. And I thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Goossaert. And thank you so much for the insightful presentation and also sharing all those useful and helpful details on the CRTA database. And I'm pretty much sure that you will see a lot of quantitative history studies maybe in the near future because of the very helpful database. Yeah, and also may I remind our audience again that you are more than welcome to submit your questions at any time in the Q&A box here, and just we will Professor Goossaert will just address as many as possible in the Q&A session. Okay, so now I would like to invite Professor Jiechen Hu and to offer his comments. And Professor Hu, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Can sound clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Then I will share the PPT. And many thanks to Professor Goossaert for your splendid and very inspiring lecture, and to the organizing professors, Professor Chen, Professor Ma, and Professor Hu for this fascinating event and for extending this invitation. It is a privilege to have this opportunity to share some reflections on today's learning. And Professor Goossaert's review of this project timeline has brought back my memories of the highly rewarding days I spent in Oslo in 2019. I found this picture on Frog Bear's website. At that time, I attended the CRTA workshop as an early career scholar. Looking back now, I suppose I can count myself among the earliest fans of the CRTA project. So in this part, I wish to focus on two main points. First, I shall share some reflections specifically inspired by today's lecture. And secondly, I shall offer some more general observations and feedback gained from following and using the CRTA systems in the past few years. And first, I wish to clarify that I do not believe CRTA contributes exclusively to quantitative research. In fact, it provides excellent entry points and search tools for qualitative research as well. However, as this is not the focus of today's lecture, I shall set that aside for now. And first, I'd like to share a brief comment on the lecture topic. I may call it the emergence generated by scattered disparate texts. I borrow the term emergence from systems theory. It is often translated as 涌现 in Chinese. Emergence occurs when a complex entity has properties or behaviors that its parts do not have on their own, and emerge only when they interact in a wider whole. So regarding quantitative analysis based on CRTA, we can now observe some of the most tangible and significant breakthroughs. Vast amounts of previously overlooked and difficult to use scattered religious texts, as well as individuals and communities now have been incorporated into the academic landscape and specific analytical frameworks. And crucially, this analytical approach also yields highly macro level and structured maps. So in my view, this structured data platform provides a toolkit that enables us researchers to connect scattered text and data. When isolated, such materials and data and texts are easily categorized or labeled by scholars as belonging to the so-called little tradition, minor tradition, or marginal, right? Yet, when assembled collectively, they can be juxtaposed for analysis alongside the so-called great tradition or mainstream tradition. And this time, this juxtaposition is not driven by value judgments, but by the feasibility of structural analysis. So to some extent, this might be likened to the concept emergence at the textual level, I think. And in this sense, such reflection on great and little traditions differs from approaches like microhistory. I believe it may be regarded as a wholly novel methodology. And these remarks were an extension of my thoughts on the lecture's theme. Based on these personal reflections, I would like to raise two additional questions, not critical at all, just because of my personal curiosity. These concerns have accompanied my research over the past few years, and I should like to take this opportunity to discuss some with Professor Goossaert. The first question is about a bias of the data. Taking CRTA as an example, its quantitative analysis undoubtedly reduces the biases inherent in qualitative studies on single texts or individuals. However, might it introduce another form of structural bias? Well, for instance, the temporal and the spatial unevenness in the survival of historical documents. The uneven representation of published and digitized materials within the broader corpus of extant documents. So naturally, I remain optimistic that improvements will be made since large-scale digitization is still on the way. So we will have more complete data, but I'm just simply curious whether Professor Goossaert has encountered similar challenges in your past research analysis. And the second question is about outcomes. This is a more straightforward question. To my knowledge, Professor Goossaert is among the earliest scholars to attempt a quantitative re-examination of these most popular religious texts, deities, and practices during the Qing dynasty. So today, with the emphasis on publishing and book history, the examples cited are Taishan Ganying Pian and spirit writing authors. I'm curious whether, so after introducing quantitative analysis, whether the conclusions diverge significantly from those of previous qualitative research in these specific fields. So, of course, I speak of divergence from a very very neutral standpoint. I would, of course, consider it valuable if quantitative findings validate our established academic consensus. Equally valuable if they propose a different interpretation. Or, in addition to this, as in your analysis of DAT networks, it may raise maybe a series of questions previously totally unformulated. I'm just very curious about that. And the final section is not specifically about the content of this lecture, but broader reflections arising from my personal experience using CRTA over recent years. I have long held the idea that religious literature and text from the Qing dynasty onwards has been undervalued in both quantity and significance. While it may not meet the strict criteria for big data in terms of volume, there are undoubtedly numerous questions that qualitative analysis cannot address and which can only be resolved through quantitative methods. So, for example, take today's theme of publishing, for instances. Vast religious texts preserve details of publishers and even donors. And vast majority, maybe more than 80 or even 90% of these people remain totally unrecorded in historical annals and even local gazetteers. So only through quantitative analysis in future can we trace these valuable clues about these figures. However, I wish to note that in recent years, I have developed a new vision building upon this foundation. I think CRTA offers an alternative possibility, not only forward, but also re-establishing a bridge to the most traditional knowledge of bibliography or philology, or more specifically in Chinese, 目录学 or 文献学. Frankly, I must state that for religious studies, the traditional knowledge structure of the 目录学, the cataloging and the bibliography, carries significant fatal flaws. When I first studied bibliography, my teachers typically recommended us two introductory texts. One is 四库全书总目提要, and another is 书目答问补正. Yet, once one delves into the religious textual research, problems immediately pop up, because traditional bibliography covers religious texts far too sparsely, and the taxonomic or typological approach is also profoundly unreasonable. So we take the Daoist canon as an example. The Daoist canon has its own distinct cataloging structure, yet within the 四库全书, all these scriptures and Daoist texts were arbitrarily extracted and forcibly inserted into the so-called 子部道家类, right? And for the vast volume of religious texts newly produced during the Qing dynasty, since the Qing dynasty, traditional cataloging offered even less room for their inclusion, actually. So consequently, even many contemporary academic catalogs published since the last century have hesitated significantly with how to classify all these religious materials, right? And the library catalogs face very similar challenges. And we do not have a very good or a feasible standard for that. So in other words, the vast religious texts produced over centuries following the rise of the commercial publishing in the late Ming period have never been properly examined within traditional bibliography, nor has their overall typology been seriously discussed. So this is my first point. And in practical bibliographic and philological activities, including acquisition of Asian books by public and university libraries since the 20th century, and then followed by cataloging these ancient texts, then their reproduction, publication, study, and recently digitization. Among all these books, religious texts consistently rank lowest in both priority and coverage. So this situation stems from multiple factors. For example, the overwhelming majority of religious texts originated in later periods, just as Professor Goossaert showed in this lecture. And so this making them unlikely candidates for the traditional classification as fine edition or rare editions, also we call the 善本, 真本, right? For example, and secondly, many religious texts exhibit substandard printing quality, diminishing their relic value. And the long-standing marginal status of religious studies in Chinese mainland has also left institutions difficult to assess the academic value of religious texts, and so on. So we have many reasons to explain this phenomenon, and consequently, a peculiar phenomenon exists within mainland China's library systems. The variety and quantity of religious texts held in private collectors far exceed those held by libraries across many regions, in many provinces. And in recent years, we think it is not uncommon to discover hundreds of religious manuscripts and woodblock print materials within a single county, and all these books that have never been cataloged by the library system. So it's totally not uncommon recently. Thus, setting aside the structural deficiency of traditional cataloging, our existing bibliographic information also fails to adequately cover religious texts from the late Ming Dynasty onwards. So this is my second point. So building on these two foundations, I believe that CRTA offers a platform for enabling us scholars to reconstruct a new structure of bibliographic scholarship. It also effectively supplements and bridges traditional bibliography 文献学 or 目录学. So to some extent, this might be viewed as the most cutting-edge quantitative analysis feeding back into the most traditional qualitative analysis. I mean, maybe. So this is my just my new gains in recent years. And finally, I should like to note that all the above reflections do not represent any academic consensus. They are largely based on my highly personal understanding and may therefore contain numerous blind spots and biases. So I will be most grateful for any corrections from all of you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hu. And Professor Goossaert, do you want to briefly respond to Professor Hu's points?
Yes, thank you. I do want the difficulty will be in the briefly, but thank you so much, Jiechen. That's very much the point. Extremely helpful. So very quickly, structural bias. Yes, absolutely, because what we are doing now in the first phase is describing things that have already been selected by either editors of reprint collections or librarians. Right? They have made selections, and their selections are very biased, as you say. They tend to look at the more beautiful illustrated books, at the more ancient books, or editions of well-known texts. So, for instance, a major format to distribute books is the concertina, the Jingzhezhuang format, right? So that's the texts that are not bound, but are just folded so that they are because they are used for rituals. That's what you use when you actually sing or perform a ritual. That's probably, possibly over half of the books were printed in that format. But this format, and I'm tagging this as a category as well now, but it's a very small part of the reprint collections because these are smaller, cheaper editions are less interesting for collectors or librarians. So that's one bias. The manuscripts. Clearly, there are many more manuscripts that have been selected in those reprint collections. The leaflets, Taishan Ganing Pian, probably the major way Taishan Ganing Pian, because Taishan Ganing Pian is short, right? So the major way, just purely quantitatively, it was distributed, was printing just one sheet, not a book, but just a sheet, right? If you print it small, it can hold on one sheet of paper. So that's much easier. You have one block, one sheet, you can make 2,000 copies and give 2,000 copies within a couple of hours, right? So this is the mainstream of the circulation of this text, not the beautiful editions by famous scholars, right? This is really very marginal, the top end. The mainstream is this, but this is not in the libraries. This is not in our collections, right? So we don't see, we see the tip of the iceberg, or just the tip of the tip. We don't see the mainstream. So absolutely true about structural bias, and we hope that by including in the future more private collections collected by researchers, we can, to some extent, overcome this bias, at least in partly, but still. Outcomes. To very briefly, one thing that I got from this kind of analysis is that texts that were popular, that were often reprinted, that were commented, tended in let's say, from the late Ming to the Republican period, mostly tended to be recent texts. So, of course, people had respect for the early texts, like the early Buddhist sutras or the early Taoist revelation. They were there, they were respected. But the Chinese were very attentive to religious innovation and to new texts, right? So the new text did not replace the old text, but they certainly, I mean, there was a continuous, how should I put it, configuration of the landscape of text, and new text constantly came to the top. So that's one outcome from the quantitative. And of course, philological-minded scholars, they like to the earliest text better, and for some good reason, right? It makes sense. But these very early texts were not necessarily the mainstream of the most popular text that people actually read and printed. Yeah, I think you're very right about the catalogs. The typology I showed, that's not a strategy for cataloging text. That's something else. That's an analytical tool. But you're right. We need to discuss with scholars who actually do the work of cataloging those texts and find common grounds to better account for the what we see as the main types of text we are dealing with, and to make that fit with their own logic as catalogers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And because of the time constraint, I think that we have a lot of questions coming in. So I'm so sorry that maybe we'll just address some of them, and for the rest of them, we'll collect all of the questions and send back to Professor Goossaert for his reference. Yeah.
Feel free to email me. You're very easily
yes.
okay. I can put that on the chat, but email me with questions or remarks or comments or suggestions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Goossaert. So we'll just first start with a question maybe asked by Professor David Mitch, and he asked about the he asked about more types of publishers and also the extent to which they responded to market forces, and what they're clearly specialist printers that emerged in response to demand for printing this text. And also that if you could say more about the circulation networks for this text, and also what their publishers who contracted with printers and then endeavored to sell this text. Yeah, maybe and also if there are any government sanctions, the censor, suppress, and also destroy this religious text.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the whole economic side, I didn't really get into this. This is obviously very important. And we'll know more when we get a better, and that's going to take a lot of work, but looking at all the names of the institutions that printed those things and identify them as either commercial prices or religious institutions or else. But my sense, and it is just an impression, so I don't have numbers to put on this right now, but hopefully in the future. But my sense is that a very large part of it is supply side, not demand side driven. By which I mean that groups like spread writing groups, they don't answer a demand. They answer the request of the god that they print and distribute the books, and so they pay the print shops to carve books from them, right? And many of those are circulated not for profit. They are just given. And still today, morality books are given and are not sold. So there is also a commercial side to it, especially, the late Baojuan and narratives and gazetteers. These things were on the market, so they are more dependent on demand. But large part of it, the scriptures were not sold. You cannot sell a scripture. You give a scripture, right, to those who want to perform it. Censorship. I've not really seen that. Where we can see it in our corpus is with the prophetic books, the prophecies, like Tuebei Tu, Wugongjing, that sort of thing. That was not only a lot of things were illegal, but actually spirit writing was illegal in the Qing. It was. Everyone did it very openly, right? Nobody, as far as I know, there's almost no recorded case of people being persecuted because they practice spread writing. That was done at court. The prophecy that was more sensitive because that was about change of dynasties and that kind of stuff. So this was Renmingan, and therefore the all the editions we have of the prophetic books are manuscript. They were not printed before the very around 1900, the very last years of the Qing. Then you begin to have printed editions of those prophetic texts. So that's where you see how that's one corner. It's a rather small corner, significant still, but small corner of the religious print culture which is very sensitive to government policies.
Okay, so as we're really running short on time, I think we'll just address two more questions. First is from Justin, and Justin is wondering about whether the number of the print editions can actually capture the book's popularity. So maybe some books that they are very popular, but they do not have a lot of different editions, and
yeah, that's the best or the least bad proxy we can have for measuring popularity. I mean, if a books have over 100 different editions, then certainly it did interest substantial numbers of different peoples in different places at different times. Yeah, but I agree that there are limitations to this approach. But well,
yeah, that's the best that we have now, right?
That's the best.
And also one question from Christopher that he asked, he's wondering whether this project can speak to how Chinese religious publishing may have responded to influences from the West and elsewhere.
Yeah, and that's something for the future, and I hope not too distant future, we integrate more Christian and Muslim books, and there are also, of course, books in languages other than Chinese, whether that's European languages or Manchu, Mongol, and other Uyghur and other languages. Then we can say more about this. In a nutshell, I would distinguish if we look at what is happening from the 1870s onwards, basically with the introduction of the Western presence in Shanghai and new printing technologies and that kind of things, I would distinguish technological modernity, the fact that we have lithography and then we have the mechanical press, that kind of things. I would distinguish this from contents. You can have very traditional contents. I mean, just reprinting without changing anything, a medieval book with the mechanical press. So that's technological modernity. It's not intellectual modernity. And then you have very innovative things reflecting on the situation in China in the 1930s, published on woodblock prints. Right? They still did what they still do today for certain type of text, woodblock printing, right? So it's one thing to use Western technologies and another thing to reflect on intellectual, religious, cultural influence of the West on the way Chinese do religion.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Goossaert. And I'm really sorry that as we are really running out of time and we do not have enough time to address all the questions, but we will just collect all of them and send all of them to you afterwards.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
yes, so I guess we have to wrap up here. So thank you very much again, Professor Goossaert, and also thank you very much, Professor Hu, for a truly engaging session today, and we really learned a lot about the CRTA and what we can do next. So thank